Hi guys. So every now and again, I watch certain videos and look at stuff, and I kind of feel really compelled that I've got to say something about it. I mean, I don't just do it, for the laugh or no reason. It's cause like I kind of like feel really strongly, and I've got to kind of voice something about it. So it's not that long ago since I discovered Howard Crowhurst, and I watched quite a few of his videos that I really liked, and then he's done a few interviews more recently, like in the last few weeks, with Megalithomania, and also Professor Mike Parker Pearson has done some interviews since the new programs on Stonehenge have come out, and I really, I really enjoy their videos and their work. And I think they're really good at what they do. Obviously Howard's really, I think he's correct and really, bang on precision with his the work that he's done with the geographical and astronomy work to do with the alignments in the stones to prove that the ancient people, obviously when there wasn't as much light pollution and the stars were really bright in the sky, so you could pinpoint positions and measure distances over space, and you literally physically mapped the land, basically like life scale model, like real scale map, basically, and also the archaeological work that they're doing. There's one or two things that I get annoyed with, like for example, when I watched the Newgrange winter solstice video, there was a lady in that video who seemed to be kind of a little bit throwing in the word feasting a few times too many. And Mike seems to do that as well, and I kind of, you have to look at it with a slight comedy value, because when certain people who tend to, the word fasting, and the whole, the Buddhist and the yogis, the Indian, Hindu religions, all have praised the benefits of fasting, and fasting went together with a lot of religious ceremonies, and the Druids were really interested in plants, and they learned all the different properties of plants, and there's no doubt that they had a very important role in the diet, in a plant-based diet, particularly for health benefits. There's no doubt about that if you've evolved from hunter-gatherer people, the word, there's one thing that I really want to say, which is the word fasting is easily corrupted into feasting just by, throwing in a few extra, like an extra letter, trying to sneak an extra letter in. So, when we do all these archaeological studies and surveys and said, oh yeah, they were droving pigs and they were farming pigs, that doesn't necessarily have evidence that they were feasting, the faces full of pigs to the extreme, So I do really get annoyed when I bought that Raffra book because, like, we're actually from Roscommon, our ancestors, my parents did the family tree, that book seems to sneak the word feasting, it's this kind of obsession with feasting houses, yet the evidence is that, a lot of the spiritual leaders and spiritual sects through all around the world through history have had a focus on fasting, not feasting. And it seems to me that when we identify the people who are the ones who like to throw the feasting word in, sneak the extra letters in and turn fasting into feasting, it always seems to be, if you get the evidence of who's sneaking the words in and have a look at them, the tale seems to tell itself. So, like, that's just one comedy I kind of hope that you think that's funny in a way, but that's one thing I've noticed from watching Mike's talks and some other people, other professionals who tend to, the ones who, it always seems to be that the people that you look at them and there's some evidence that they might have been, sneaking a few extra helpings of food in themselves. They're the ones who sneak in the feasting word into the books and into the presentations and work, whereas, like for example, Howard Crowhurst doesn't, he's not even that, he doesn't even think that farming is that significant with the ancient monuments that mapped the geography out, and the astrology and astronomy and the spiritual practices, and all this, they celebrating ancestors, you know, Howard is definitely not pushing this excess eating trend on his students, you know. So I just wanted to mention that before I get into this. And I've been going 5 minutes already, but I thought that was important to. It's one thing that seems to be popping up now when they're doing their talks at the moment, you know. Right, so we've got these stones in front of us in this picture that the lady kindly put up on the group, shared to the group with her drawings. So both Howard Crowhurst and Mike Parker Pearson have both, when they do the talks about their specialist field, for example, the astronomy and measurements with Howard or with the archaeology with Mike, when they've done their presentations on the work that they're doing, that they're specialists in, they do tend to mention and raise some subjects, a little bit of the mythology, right? Particularly things like, you know, the Geoffrey of Monmouth stories, you know, with the dragon and, you know, the moving of the stones and things like that. And it's clearly obvious that there's a lot more information in these stories that isn't necessarily extractable, you know, at first look, you know. And the stones were moved from, you know, they were moved from Ireland, they were moved from Wales, but, you know, the stories may have been slightly changed or adapted or reordered over time, and I think there's a lot more information in those tales and stories than, you know, I don't think they're all, you know, there's only like one or two bits scraps of information in them, or one kind of gem of information. I think that there's a lot more information in those tales and stories, even if they get slightly changed or realtered, you know. Now, Howard was talking, I don't advocate Howard's theory on the acupuncture theory for these, you know, sites and stones implanted into the land. I think it was there, so they were permanent, and, you know, sort of, you know, if it takes a whole religious order or villagers to put them into place, then, you know, they can't be easily moved. Or, you know, if you had signposts around the country, you wouldn't want a load of, you know, thieves in the woods or village idiots or whoever to just go and move them to confuse people. You know, you'd want them, you know, if it takes a whole village to put it there, then it's going to take at least someone who's got, you know, authority over a whole village to move it again. Do you know what I mean? So the first thing is that, you know, I think the reason they're implanted in there and permanent is to last, you know, forever, and to not easily be moved and moved out of alignment, which is kind of self-explanatory and obvious, you know. But Howard doesn't say that. He's kind of got this kind of acupuncture sort of theory. And other than that, they clearly are just for mapping the landscape and for getting around, you know. If you've got like Sisbury Ring Hill Fort and they're supplying flint to the whole country, then, you know, you need some sort of travel thing in place. I think it really was the equivalent of what we've got now with the pavements and the roads and the, you know, what we call the structure of, you know, our structure now is like pavements and, you know, post boxes and phone boxes and road signs and things like that. And now we're kind of getting rid of the phone boxes because we've all got mobile phones, you know. So it's just a Stone Age equivalent of that. And, you know, but for orientation, but symbolically as well. But why have I got the photos of these newgrange stones? Well, I want to sort of, the main two things that I wanted to talk about in this talk, even if you've bothered listening to it this far, we're currently in 8 minutes now, are firstly the dragon theme, and then secondly is just the geometry itself. Now, if we think about the Tessili Denasia artwork in Algeria, a lot of that artwork is kind of animals, and it is also, there's a lot of spiritual, abstract pictures, but they have characters, you know, human-like characters or human mixed animal characters. And it's that style, you know, assessing the human forms. We could call them the spooks if you want, you know, and you know, that early representation, you know, in the when we get on to, once we get away from Africa, it seems like they've moved on and already covered the whole subject of the animal and human, kind of like the spirits, and, you know, to an extent where they're actually drawing the spirits. And we've moved on to geometry, you know, but you'd have thought it would have started with geometry and then, you know, moved on to the spooks. But I think it's the other way around. The ghosts and spirits and animal forms actually seem to be drawn first, earlier, back in Algeria, and then later on, once they're doing the alignments and the sunrise and the sunset and all these, you know, longitude and latitude lines that Howard Carruthers has proved line up perfectly, that's when the geometry actually comes into it, which we do have in, you know, in the chambers in both Ireland and in France, you know, in northwestern Europe, right? So now on this on the stone, right, on the bottom one, on the bottom left, that grid is really, really well known because it's used on the golfing sweaters, you know, on the Pringle sweaters that golfers wear. They have, it's like, is it referred to as an Argyle pattern? Argyle, right? So now, if we're talking about alignments, right, and I hope you kind of had patience to listen to me up to this point, you know, maybe I could have started the conversation at this point, you know, and gone straight into this, but I kind of, there's other things I wanted to say as well, you know. So with all the alignments and the geography and all the precision mathematics and things like that, right, now at the moment in the modern day world, right, there's something called the Riemann hypothesis, right? It's a mathematical problem, right? And it's a mathematical problem that a very, very rich Australian guy has said that he was going to offer, like, you know, his whole fortune to someone who could solve it. And I actually did, I proposed a solution for it on my website. I wrote a whole thing about it, and I actually sent it off to a few of the universities, you know. But, you know, I wasn't doing it. I wasn't actually going to claim the prize money, but I actually believe that it's to do with a grid pattern, right? You know, like when you've got a graph, and, you know, and you've got the 0 point and you go up and down, or you've got the 0 point and you go east or west, right? Now, that Riemann hypothesis, it's to do with solving, you know, when you go from a plus into a minus, when you go from plus something to minus something, right? So, like, if you've got -1 or -2 or -3 or -4, but on a 3, you know, like on a grid pattern, on a 2-dimensional grid pattern. So you've got +1 and -1 on the longitude, and you got +1 and -1 on the latitude, right? Now, it's about trying to find this, you know, fractions and doing calculations when you go into minus. And it's all about, you know, whether you've got something or nothing. But going into minus in the physical, minus isn't minus in the physical realm, because theoretically, once you get to nothing, nothing is nothing, and something disappears, and you haven't got anything there. But on the graph, you go into minus on a graph, and it's only a representation of minus. It is actually still something. So, you know, even 0, even nothing on the grid is something, right? Now, this is actually a well-known and kind of famous mathematical problem to do with, it's actually only worked out that they use a graph and a grid pattern. Now, if you look at this stone, right, at Newgrange, the bottom left section of the bottom stone, that actually is a graph and grid pattern, right? And that Riemann hypothesis could be, you could use that to try and calculate it, but you won't calculate it because the actual reality of the Riemann is trying to work a problem out 2-dimensionally, right? When it's a matter of, in reality, when minus is not really minus, because once you've taken away something, you haven't actually got anything there. And actually, when you're going to start going -1, -2, -3, -4, you're actually starting to count again, Now, if you think about these places as spiritual places, and if you think about, when does something appear and disappear from existence, or when does, if you're wanting to, use like, spirit world or spirit travel, and if they're using, various sacraments and things like that, you could go, when you've got the world around you, right, which you're measuring all this sunrise and sunset and all the geography and everything like that, and aligning all these cairns up to these actual things in the real world. Now, if that world disappears and you go inside to an inner world, to an imagination world, or to a spirit world, or whatever you want to call it, for example, like we know with the South American tradition, they've got the sacraments, and anyone who's used them will know what I'm talking about. You go into the world of the imagination. Now, you can, in the mind, in the imagination, you can think of something. You can think of a figure or a number. You can think of a number 1, or you can think of 2, or think of 3, or you can think of a horse, or you can think of, you can think of a shape, a cube, or anything. In the mind, it's almost like it's not actually in reality. You haven't actually made something really exist. It only exists kind of like in your brain, in the mind, and it's not touchable, it's not there. So it's almost like going from something into nothing, but you've still got something there. So the theory of it from going plus to minus, it's going from, once I've got a pie, right, then I haven't got a pie, there's nothing there, right? But I can still think of a pie, but a pie doesn't appear in my hand. It's only... you can think of it in your mind, and the pie exists in your mind, but there's nothing physically there. So you could say you've got into the minus realm, into the minus world, like it's a spirit pie. It doesn't really exist, except in your mind, and you can have, you can do fractions of the pie to your heart's content, half a pie, quarter of a pie, 0.5 of a pie, but you'll never have a pie because there isn't a pie. Do you know what I mean? So that, to me, definitely has got something to do with the difference between reality and the actual touchable world around us, and then going to your inner world, the mind, the inner world of the mind and the spirit. It doesn't matter whether you do it just through meditation or whether you're using, sacrament plants or whatever. But to do with calculating things and working things out, okay, to build these monuments, Howard Crowhurst has proved these precision calculations over great distances, like the longitude and latitude of the entire British Isles are perfectly aligned, Howard Crowhurst has proved that, right? And really, that is the kind of precision and exact workings out that people need to calculate, pi to, 3.333, whatever it is, and all these Riemann level mathematics that supposedly only the ancient Greeks could do, and all these, triangle and triple square bases. I mean, if you look at the 3 dots, Howard's got this thing with these triple square lined up to do with the church building and like the rectangle, and you've got these 3 dots in here, and then you've got all the little rainbow patterns around it. Now the rainbow is a symbol of the light, the white light being split into its constituent colours, the separate colours of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, because they're all the separate colours that white light's made out of. Now, when you take the sacraments, it breaks down, you can examine your body and the separate functions of your body in the same way, in emotional system and, cognitive system, and then biological, your physical, all the different... There's a insight that you have, in different regions of the brain, and it's very good for examining and assessing, these things when they're separated into the component parts. Do you know what I mean? Not in a physical realm sense of a doctor actually, dissecting the body and looking at it, because you can do that way, but through an actual self-assessment and self-reflection. Do you know what I mean? Like that. So it's almost like, and then you can also assess, different effects that are happening around you. And if you wanted to, separate, have you heard of those sensory deprivation tanks, when people go into them to try and block out all sound and light that could affect an experience? So you have an experience that is purely your own mind and sounds and everything without any contamination. There's that aspect to a lot of these chambers and things like that. But then you've got the opposite theory where you can not only use them to try and dampen the effects like a sensory deprivation tank, but also on the opposite sense, if you think of quartz actually is used as a crystal that resonates, and it can, be used for watches and radios and things like that. So there's another theory of these places actually, instead of dampening off, contamination that's coming in from light and sound around you, in connection with certain spiritual experiences you might have, there's the other theory where it enhances them, and could actually even, enhance it. And even broadcast it. If you think if we believe that quartz has got any properties like that. So back to the reimanns hypothesis again. I think that this bottom left corner, you will find if you look into it, right. I think that it fits with ancient, astrology and measurements and mathematics. I think that this bottom left Argyll pattern is very fitting to this Riemann hypothesis, but not only in the sense of mathematical calculations, but also the fact that Riemann's can't be solved by mathematics alone, because when you have got something to count, or when you haven't got something to count, there's nothing there. So notice that you go into the realm of, the mind. And the realm of the mind, and understanding the mind, and even what, a thought is. What is a thought, Because at the end of the day, if you've got a ruler and you want to put marks on it, where do those marks come from, Even though in nature there's something as, you can divide an apple perfectly in half, but it was a human that divided it perfectly in half. And you've got ancient geometry where, things tend to grow in a sphere, like an apple will grow in a sphere. And that's all to do with, a person didn't work it out. It's just to do with the laws of physics, right? The laws of gravity and how physics works and things like that. But if you want to start, naming, if you want to create a ruler and then put marks on the ruler and say this is half of it and this is a third of it and this is a quarter of it, you're actually naming it then, and your actual numbers themselves are really just names. Numbers are names for measurements, but we created them, we invented them in his mind, So really, actual precision measurements are named by the human being and are from the imagination, So and it's not that subject itself, the imagination, is not the subject of mathematics, is it? It's the subject of what is a thought and where does a thought come from and what happens when there's no thought, If in maths you're doing +1, then you go into -1, and then -2 and -3 and -4. If you don't have a thought, then once you get to no thoughts, then what's minus one thought? Because when you're thinking of something, even if a pie is a real pie or a pretend pie, right? Even if it's the thought of a pie, it's not a real pie, so it's nothing. So when you think of two pies, it's still not a real existing thing in the real world. It's only another thought, but then it's still something. It's not nothing anymore. It's not nothing. It's still something. Now this, we're getting into psychology. There's many subjects then that you're raising that are relevant. And you can't solve the problem on mathematics alone. It's not possible. So these chambers and these pictures here are all to do with these things, representations of this area of study. There's no doubt about it, because we know that it's to do with living in the real world, measuring the real world, mathematically measuring it like Howard Crowhurst does, but it's also to do with the spirit world and the ancestors and the sacraments and the evolution of, ideas in the first place, and the fact that the capacity of the human can think and have ideas and even do that anyway. So that is the relevance of this artwork, and then obviously the one in the middle on the left, you've got the triangles. I mean, the vision breaks down to triangular patterns anyway when you use certain, even without the use of psychedelics, But I think that Reimanns hypothesis is extremely relevant to the bottom left picture, and when I was reading the work on the Reimanns hypothesis, nobody made a reference to newgrange. Now, they might have known that themselves and they might not have said it, but they didn't write it down and put it in the work. So, now, something else that I really want to say about this bottom left picture is that, so my study, I'm not a mathematician and I'm not an archaeologist, but my study was with the psychedelics and with ayahuasca and things like that when I was doing my own study work, practical study work. And you can't really, in England and in Ireland and in the British Isles, there is no such thing. I mean, you've got degrees in anthropology. You can have a degree in anthropology, but if you're in England, I mean, unless you're at the Imperial College and you've got a license and, you've got people experimenting with, psychedelics and things like that at the moment, but I don't think that it's anything, they're experimenting on people there, but then they're doing these really, these questionnaires that I find questionable, right? It's actually, it's not legal, really, for colleges and universities. It's not like they're getting a license to possess psychedelics or even manufacture them and study the, newgrange and, Bella Snap and Noth in context with any hypothesis or theory that they might have been using context with the sacraments, openly acknowledged. And, we're openly acknowledging that in South America they're studying it. We've got people going out there and taking ayahuasca and stuff, right? But what we don't seem to be doing is, or at least in Ireland and England at the moment, it's illegal to possess and use, our sacrament, which is clearly, we've clearly got it. It's written all over the Gunderstrup Cauldron, so there's no point kind of, beating around the bush about it because it's all over the Gunderstrup Cauldron. So, it's not legal to study it. It doesn't seem, like anyone's going to be studying it outside of the Imperial College's, weird and wacky little simple questionnaire. How did you feel in this experience? How would you rate this experience on a scale of 1 to 10? Did you feel happier or sad after this experience? Do you feel relieved of your anxiety? How much does your anxiety feel relieved on a scale of 1 to 10? Did you feel you could work for your problems? How well did you work for your problems on a scale of 1 to 10? It's not exactly going into the Reimanns hypothesis and depicting the iconography of dragons or anything like that. But we know for a fact that on the Gunderstrup Cauldron, we've got the snake, the serpent, right? And we know the serpent's got scales on it. And there is without a doubt, even with the chakras, when you get onto studying the chakras, when you get the pattern that it forms, when you get these kind of sort of like waves crossing over them, that is the bottom left Argyll picture, right? Pattern, the Pringle pattern, on the stone here, which I have associated to the Reimanns hypothesis, right? And we've got the middle stone there that's got the triangle patterns like an original when it breaks down. The scales of the dragon, the scales of the beast, the ancient, creature, Jim Morrison sings about it, ride the snake to the lake, the ancient lake, right? So, that is the dragon, the mythical beast of the dragon. It's a mythical creature, that doesn't exist, although, we know that the ancients could find, dinosaur bones and things like that. We knew that they knew that there was ancient, reptiles, or the reptile itself was an ancient animal anyway of itself. So this dragon thing, right? Not everyone, people who haven't actually had that experience using the sacraments don't usually consider the dragon in that exact context, It's not just a matter of, having, a triangle pattern in front of your eyes, when you get up and feel a bit lightheaded. It's a little bit more deeper than that. But the dragon, though, there's no... what I want to say is that, these people who made Newgrange and the French, sites and implanted these alignments, they're not actually drawing a dragon, a mythical beast, on the walls of these places, right? And they're not really drawing any humanoid characters. They're not drawing human forms or animal forms at all, like back in Algeria, where they were, drawing the animal and human forms. They've gone on to the more purely mathematical and geometrical shapes, and they're doing really big precision things with them over great distances, like Howard Crowhurst has, proved. Because these, he's gone on to a greater mathematical concept, but we've still got the association with the spirit, but it's got less of the kind of spooky ghost, characters like we see in Algeria, like the alien, characters and the half animal, half man characters. What I'll like just refer to them as the spooks. There are a few references to them as the spooks in a couple of the James Bond movies. like in Doctor No and things like that. It refers to the spooks, and I think that it's important that when when we go from the Celtic period over to when the Vikings are coming over and attacking, and then we've got the Danes as well, both of those Eastern peoples, both the Danes and the Vikings and the Saxons, right, it's them who seem to have come over, right, and they started scrawling. So the Vikings and the Danes and the Eastern cultures that had the language that used the word elf and elfin, they definitely had the same spiritual experiences, I believe, but the iconography that they came over with, when there's evidence that they scrawled the dragon symbol in these chambers, a long time after the chambers were even created. It's them who brought the dragon over as an actual creature symbolized as a dragon, not symbolized actually as a pattern of the scales of the dragon. This great, you could even call it an interpretation of God or the mother goddess, or the experience of the divine consciousness or whatever. This great beast that you kind of feel the world constructed out of. The whole basically everything that exists. The Arthurian period. When we get to the Arthurian period, we've got the Welsh culture that is written in the Celtic language is the culture that's adopted the dragon, right? That the symbol and picture of the dragon as a mythical beast, as a dragon, right, is adopted by the Welsh, and it's actually used now, and they symbolise the Celtic culture with the dragon, yet it's the Anglo-Saxons coming over who were in conflict with the Celts who actually brought the dragon over, really. So, the whole Arthurian dragon and all the Geoffrey of Monmouth stuff, all that is actually brought in, and it's I don't believe that, I don't really think that it's that good for the Welsh to be using the dragon symbol to try and defend the Celtic language with. unless it's meaning, it's putting a hand up and stopping the Saxons and stopping them there, and it's a Saxons dragon, they're actually putting their hand up to say stop, you know what I mean? But, so, going back to Newgrange and Knowth and the French sites that are before that period, the people before the Celts, the prehistoric people, were using these geometric shapes. That still represents, there's no doubt whatsoever that those scales there on the bottom left, the Argyle pattern, that is the representation of this spiritual experience. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but they're not actually putting any character or humanoid forms on these walls like they're doing back in Algeria. It seems to me like, I think that all that kind of animal and kind of, if you don't have a deep and heavy spiritual experience with a sacrament, so it's only a light one, then you get all these kind of, humanoid kind of figures, and call them the spooks and the fairies and the elves, right? Until you get through to the fundamental kind of intelligence and underlying. Once you're getting into these things that they're putting here, right, these patterns that they're using on the chambers, you're getting past being spooked out or scared, or past, talking about fairies and folklore. You're actually on to, evaluating what is there for the basic and principle of what it is, what is, the fundamental underlying principles of things, what is a human, It actually, in that film Dr. No mentioned before, there's a line that, minerals pretending they're whales, when he goes into Dr. No's lair. And I think that's quite important to do with that experience, because it, when you have some of these experiences, when the human being and consciousness is broken down and separated, you experience the self as really minerals, it's like, what am I? There's just some water and, bone and calcium and all these, separate chemicals, just literally as if you poured them into, a soup and mix them all up together, and it's just kind of like that sort of fundamental, evaluating experience. It's a way of calculating things, and looking at things in a scientific mindset, in a scientific perspective, which is, in a way, it's more simple than, more advanced constructs, but the precision that it's done at to get those sites built and created, and the measurements on the longitude and latitude to align these sites, it's a lot more. It's a major step forward than going back to just sitting there and copying animal forms, or even having visions of animal forms, or half animal, half human forms, which they seem to be, the spooks, the ghosts, and the elves. The little faces and things. When you're born as a baby, and the vision, not many people can remember being born, but when you have this rebirth experience, it's the whole, going back to the spook side of it, and faces, humanoid pictures. When you're, when you've just been born and there's doctors and nurses looking down at you, you're not going to remember that. But this is out of the, the pixels of your vision, and when your focus becomes clear, when we talk to the world, like when you get a teddy bear and you hug a teddy bear and you talk to a teddy bear, or when you look at a tree and you see a face in a tree, there is a part of us that always seems to inherently try to make a human form a point of contact, it's almost like to be grounded into the world, to be grounded and born and you're looking for the mother, you know, you're looking for the mother's face, or looking for another human face to talk to and communicate with, you know, to speak to another living thing, whether or not, you know, it's broken down into a spirit and you're talking to it as a spirit, you know, spirits usually appear in some sort of form where they've got a communication contact point, you know, whether it's two eyes and a mouth, and that's why usually when you look at a tree, your body and vision seems to make faces out of trees, because, you know, the branches seem to just approximate with those kind of features, and we seem to kind of, you know, do that, and that is going back to the earlier, you know, back in Algeria when they're doing these drawings. By the time we've got to the point where they're doing these precise measurements of longitude and latitude, and they've already done all the hunter-gathering and explored the whole land, they know where you can find this food and what time of year you can find this food and what time of year you can find that food and where to go for this and that, you know. By the time we've got to the stage here, they're not, you know, why aren't there any, you know, pictures of, you know, people or things like that? Why are they going for the geometric shapes? Because it is more of a, you know, you could say, you know, it's more of a scientific mind that is, you know, they've got to a stage where they understand all the ghosts and the spooks. They understand the spirit and how it arises out of the human being, and why we associate these patterns and where these forms come from, and, you know, understand what animals are, and this kind of getting on to the, you know, what, you know, all these scientists now who are studying, you know, how do you even get an atom or a molecule, and all these where do these leptons come from, and protons and neutrons, you know. Even when you look at a molecule now, and I don't mean the line drawings of a molecule, I mean like the ball shape interpretation of a molecule is more realistic, you know. It looks like a blackberry, you know, and the microscopic is always reflected in the macro, you know, like how molecules even, you know, are. It shows us that in nature, you know, you can look at a blackberry, and this is, it kind of shows you and teaches you what's happening on a microscopic level, you know what I mean? And there are ways there are faculties you can have through visions that can actually do that, you know. And I've actually done other talks on that, but I kind of wanted to focus on these stones here, because when you get to the fundamental thing of, you know, where do things come from, how do you get something from absolutely nothing, you know, scientists are still trying to work it out now, you know. You know, people have been wrong, and people have been teaching things at colleges and schools and universities that, you know, now have been proved that, you know, they've got new theories that have, you know, superseded the older theories, you know. But with this geography and geometry, definitely, without question, right, you know, if people say, you know, what does it, we don't know what this means at all, I just want to, you know, put it on the table and propose that there definitely is an idea about what this thing is about, and it's not just an idea. I would say, you know, with certainty, that these pictures and icons, right, particularly the bottom stone here on the bottom left quarter, I think without doubt that has a real relationship to the principle or the problem of the reimanns hypothesis. And at the end of the day, if you've either got a big stone in front of you, right, and if you take a big stone away, you don't have a big stone, you've got nothing, right? So you've either got something or nothing. And when you ain't got a big stone, and when you ain't got cairns everywhere, and when you haven't got the measurements right, and when you haven't got, you know, it lined up correctly with the sun, you ain't got nothing. There's nothing there, right? So, you know, plus or minus, you know, there's nothing. You know, never mind, you know, minus and nothing, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's minus one cairn, you know, or no, if you've got no cairns and no granges and no sites, you've got no cairns and no granges and no sites and no stones. You got nothing, right? Now, we ain't got no cairns and no granges or sites. We've got hundreds of them. So they're there, they exist. So, that's like the stone being there. Well, it's there. There's something. So, what have you got? Have you got anything for us? Well, yeah, we've got these sites. No, we didn't have them, we won't have them, And having none is no different to having -1, If you got, apparently there's only 10% of them all left anyway. There's Howard Crow's saying there's, only 10% left of what was there in the first place. But at least that's something, Now, if they had all these measurements and alignments and the geography and astronomy in their minds, right? But didn't actually go out and implant the stones and make them, then, there wouldn't be anything there in the landscape. It would only be in their minds, right? And in their heads. But almost you could count infinite ideas and infinite understanding and infinite measurements and infinite calculations of these geometric and geographical alignments, right? Like Howard Crow's been working out, You could do it on paper, or you could just do it in your head, or remember it, or you could do it in a song, right? And you could have it, and that would be like counting into minuses, because it's something, minus is something, it's not nothing. If you've got nothing, you ain't got anything at all. Nothing is nothing at all, right? But if you've got -1 thought, it's a thought of, this is the thing. If you can't have nothing and have minus something, because -1 is something, you're thinking about it, right? You're thinking of there being, once less than nothing, then twice less than nothing. It's a calculation and it exists. The calculation exists, right? This is kind of what these stones are about in these drawings. It's about theory. It's about the underlying principle of geometry and calculation, and it is basically fundamental underlying principle of knowledge and calculation and understanding itself and what it actually is, and it's about working things out. That's why, the Riemann hypothesis, they say, it's not been solved and they're going to give someone loads of money. It's kind of a bit of a joke in a way, because I think that they actually know and understand this, and, I think that it's kind of a bit of a joke, because the problem can't be solved by mathematics alone. It has to be other subjects that understand the difference between something and nothing, and the difference between minus is only a concept. Nothing on a grid is not nothing, because on a grid, 0 is a geographical place and location, right? Nowhere. You can't have nowhere if you've got somewhere. And it's got to do with the fact that if you are a scientist, right, and you want to measure with an instrument, right, what happens in space and time, even out in the universe, to send a probe out into space, you can't measure or investigate nothing when you have got something, because you have to measure it with something, which is an instrument, right? So, because to have a sensor or to have any instrument at all known to mankind, whether it's a computer, whether it's a calculator, whether it's a pen, whether it's a ruler, it is something existing itself, right? So you can't have a control or random experiment to measure the concept even of nothing when you have an instrument that exists, because something's in existence. And that is the whole problem with the Reimanns hypothesis itself. And these are the things that these people, and if you're clever enough to measure the alignments of the planets and this, and the moon and precision, longitude and latitude things, you're intelligent enough, and you've studied the spirit and the human emotions and the human mind and the human construct and spirituality and the human problems and conundrum to a proficient level enough to have looked into that yourself and found the answer that you can't have something without nothing, And this is the thing. So, in a way, these monuments really demonstrate that, because he's telling us, we've got something. We work something out. We've got something, and we want you to all know that and remember that. And what happens if someone erased it or got rid of it? Well, they're still there. There's still 10% of these monuments there. We know for a fact that some people have tried to remove them and erase these monuments. But there's still some of them there. So, for example, the Romans wanted to destroy all the ancient, groves and sacred groves and everything, but they didn't do a good enough job of it, did they? They tried to, solve the reimanns. How do we make, zero evidence of the Druids left? Nothing. How can we completely wipe them out to nothing? They didn't do a good job of it because there's still some of them, 10% of the things there. So, we've still got something. And I think that's quite important for reimanns, because even if you actually did wipe out all these monuments and alignments and everything, you can't get rid of the planet because the planet still exists and the sun and moon's going up, and moving around, and it can still be measured, and the human mind's evolved to an extent where it can still measure it, how Crowhurst is there going, how did they do it? Well, he said, I don't know how they did it. Well, it's clearly how they did it. They measured it, and they did a lot of study of it. And that's how they put these monuments here to as a permanent, measurement, for use, to travel. Why else? What else for? To study and travel and expand, measurements and knowledge and study and travel, So, and it's not only mathematics, but you might say to me, well, if that bottom left grid, is similar to a fundamental representation of, the difference between having something and having nothing, and even the concept of thinking about it, then, and the measurements themselves, and measurements are used to build the structures, but what about the right-hand side? What about these little rainbowy things when, which, is about light being separated, and then you've got these 3 dots, which is, Howard does this triple square, which is, 3 squares together, and why the perimeter around them. Well, I think that is something to do with when you go onto this spiritual side of it, and when you go into the studying it, these structures are, they're built as chambers, right? And it's definitely got to do with, human thought, and it's to do with the effects of human thought and human thinking, and it's to do with the interaction of thoughts, and it's to do with experimenting with it and the study of it, because they've got their stone where they block the chamber up, and they said that in Newgrange that the quartz block that blocks the top, the top hatch, it actually was taken out and put back in again. You're definitely going into the subjects, like of the sensory deprivation tanks, or the opposite of that, which is, broadcasting and enhancing, which, quartz crystals does. There's definitely something in that, and study of, spiritual study of breaking down what we are as a human thinking, calculating creature, that's what it's about. And I think that it's evident in there. And the whole, dragons and the myths of dragons, it's only a way of talking about it, a translation. You've got to have some terminology, and certain people's, we know that these people used to record things as stories and representations, so creatures like dragons, it's to symbolise, these things. We've definitely got the dragon scales on here, which is part of that experience. There's no doubt about it whatsoever, It's just that, I don't see people talking about it. I wish that Howard Crowes would talk about it and Mike Parker Pearson would talk about it in their talks, but they do all this amazing, complicated technical stuff. But there are people who are talking about it, like Terence McKenna and Daniel Pinchback and Dennis McKenna and people like that. What I find is that we don't seem to be getting these people coming together and talking about it. And this dividing line as well, this dividing line on this bottom stone that has like a fork at the top of it as well. That actually, there's a lot of things that are also on that Gunderstrup cauldron, like the plate with the horses plate on that cauldron, right? You've got the sort of division between the 4 horsemen on the top and the guys at the bottom, and then there's a little like fork bit at the end of it, like that's on here, There are a lot of things on that cauldron, I could go into it, where you can draw comparisons and similarities. In fact, the trip on the top stone on the left-hand side, the triple spiral, I've put this in the group already before, right? That triple spiral, if you look at the Gunderstrup cauldron and look at the little tiny drawings of the little plants around the Sununurus character, if you look at the ones that have got 3 stems on them, you'll notice there is like a spiral pattern around them, or like a ethereal, spiritual, geometric pattern around them. And the ones that have got 3 on them, right, if you trace the perimeter and the outside of that, it's exactly the same shape as the triple spiral on the top left stone here. Exactly. And I don't think that is a coincidence either. And when you match that up, it's clearly obvious. It's clearly obvious without a doubt, Even if you turn the cauldron upside down, you've got a mound shape with that pattern on the inside of it on one of the inside plates. So, it just, why aren't people saying that? I kind of get a little bit annoyed when sort of people still are going, we don't really know. It is obvious, and we do know, we know that is factual evidence enough to turn that cauldron upside down and say, well, I've got this pattern on the inside of it, on the Sunurus character, and it's perfectly the same outer perimeter shape as the 3 spirals, right? Now, that is a fact and a fact that go together. I mean, how different is that to Mike Parker Pearson going somewhere, going over to Wales, or he's got a myth from Geoffrey of Monmouth that says, stones were brought over from somewhere to the east side, not the west. They were brought over from, he says Ireland, but, but it turns out to be Pembrokeshire, and then brought over, right? He goes over there, he has a sniff around, he finds the exact holes. Oh, look, that fits in there. Now, that is his academic evidence at university professor level, what he uses to say, well, this goes there. It's fact, right? Stick it in the university paper, publish it on TV. We know that, right? So why are people still kind of, with these stones at Newgrange? It kind of annoys me when when people are still kind of going, oh yeah, well, we don't know for certain, or we're not really sure, or, we're still trying to work it out. Like, shut up. Do you know what I mean? It really annoys me because fact, and, but then you might say, well, the Gunderstrup cauldron was found, it was found in Denmark. It wasn't found in Ireland. Yeah, well, so what? It's, turn it upside down, he's got it on the inside of the plate, and it's got the same shape on it. And we know that the tin from that, some elements of that have come from Britain anyway, and we know that the Druid culture was all over Europe anyway. So these people are always looking for evidence in the ground. Dig something up with a trowel. Oh, I found a little bit of bone on this. Proves that, and I sent it to a lab and tested it. I kind of get annoyed when, you start saying, well, there's a lot of people throwing a lot of ideas in there and nobody really knows, everyone's got different ideas and this and that. And then pastry guys are on there going, lots of people are saying things, but, I'm telling you now, there is no doubt whatsoever that if you are at a level of mathematics which has successfully measured longitude and latitude over greater distances that Howard Crowesus has proved, and you know about this level of mathematics and measurement and geometry and about the study not only the outside world to that level and degree but the inner world of spirit as well, right? There is no doubt at all that when you're getting onto the subject of thinking about these concepts of something and nothing, plus and minus, whether something exists only in the mind or in reality, what happens when you take something away, but, I don't have a pie anymore, but I can still think of a pie in my mind, that is, you're onto the concept of, something and nothing, and reimanns, and you get onto the grid pattern and working it out, and then the stone itself, I've got, how many stones have I got? 3 stones, what's 1 stone plus another stone is 3 stones. What happens if I take 3 stones away? I don't have any stones, right? But we have got 3 stones because they're there, And then again, if you look at the right hand section of the bottom stone, you could even say, you've got the 3 dots there with the perimeter border around it, right? And then you've got a number of rainbow patterns around the outside, right? They might be real, but then inside the perimeter, you've got 3 there. Doesn't matter whether they're real or not. They could be imagined, but they exist. They exist in the mind, It's a conceptual representation of thinking. It's fundamental. It's archetypical. It's the art of archetypes, and it's the art of underlying principles and forces. And you could even say, vision itself. When the vision's created and evolved, how do we end up with eyes? How do you end up with a retina? How do we end up with those triangle patterns? What happens if you've got 1 triangle pattern, then 2 triangle patterns, and then you've got an entire vision in front of you? This is the type of thing that this is about. So, it's not, we're past saying, we don't know what these symbols are at all, and we don't really know what they're about, or we don't have an idea what they're about. We do. It is about, without a doubt, because what's the chamber there for? It's there. It's in relation to doing calculations, and working things out, to a very competent and advanced level, and that is what you get onto when you get into reimanns, And that's what you get onto when you're actually making things and building things, when you got something, but not just like, building a museum or building a bank or building a helicopter or a car, these buildings are not pure celebration of geometry or not pure celebration of spirituality. When you've got this division line here, the human, you can't solve rhyme, you can't solve things by only one subject alone. You need to understand many different things, to assess and evaluate the world and the planet, and that's what it is about. There's no doubt about it. That's what it is about, So, the interpretation is there, without doubt, and it's not. It's not at the Algeria level of, the spooks, and the ghosts and the gnome faces and the, half cow, half man pictures and that. He's gone on to we're clearly at a conceptual and scientific, primitive science. You could say that these are primitive scientists because that's what it's about. It's about, if you think of a blackberry, right? If you say, all right, then, in my other talks and videos that I've done, I've gone on the subject of Bella Snap and the resistance energy across, rooms and across structures. The human can feel these resistance energies, and like I propose that's what Bella Snap was for, feeling and studying, and it had something to do with that, because is a relationship to the Earth. The whole planet has got a magnetic pole, and certain animals can sense which is north, like birds and things like that. And if you wanted to, if it was cloudy and you didn't have the stars to guide you, and if there weren't any monuments around or stone circles, for you to calculate your position and where you traveling to, then you could fall back on that magnetic sense that, like, what animals and birds have for that feeling of north, align yourself with north. And if you've studied at Bella Snap, and felt these resistance angles against these structures, elongated structures, because I've actually studied that myself, and I know it exists, like in Feng Shui and things like that. Because I've got a room that it's not a triple square, it's a double square length. But when I first moved into it, I laid across it, and there was a resistance feeling across that room, and it wasn't right. I had to lay, in an alignment with the length of it, and that is very similar to what's going on at Bella Snap. And I know that without question, it is related to that, because it exists. We know that the force exists on the planet, that you can feel an alignment with the whole planet and the direction. We know that it exists because animals do it, and if animals can do it and understand it, without even writing it down or thinking about it, then why can't the human? And maybe they created these structures to just try and, maybe you could not only study it and sense it and get used to it, maybe you could actually increase your sensitivity to it, so you could feel it more, the resistance and the non-resistance alignments to structures and buildings and places, and then that could enhance your feeling of it on a global level with the whole planet, with the feeling of. And we know that when you magnetize a piece of metal, like a pin or something, when we get into the Iron Age and things like that, they're learning, watching, observing your little pieces of metal floating around and pointing north to the planet anyway when they're in some water, These forces exist, That's what these places are all about. I highly rate, all the work that Howard Crowhurst has done, but when he just simply gets on too early, it's just acupuncture, or the planet's ill or the world's ill. I don't think that the stones were implanted and put there for the reason, just to cure the planet. They were put there so they wanted to map the place and measure the place and put a structure there for other people to use, like we've got our own systems in place for people to use, for the public to use, so people at, Sisbury Ring Hillfort, they can have flints and travel and know the way around, because they were taking it other places. It's about different places having different things, whether it's an alignment with the celestial objects, and that's why they built them in these places, because it had an alignment, but also different areas and places have different resources and materials at different times of year, and different things grow. We know that from the Aboriginals, how the Aboriginals live in Australia. They go where the food is, at certain times of year they can eat these plants, and then in winter the other plants at different areas, or they've got to eat lizards and animals, and they travel around because they sing the song of the billabong or whatever, and they know the song, and they sing their journey to remember where to go, to turn left at this tree and right at that tree. Trees aren't permanent, trees die, or people can cut trees down, and then you can't find your way if you remember the song to travel by the trees, so it has to be a permanent structure. Now, all this is what Howard should be saying at the end of his talk, when he's done all the bang-on, accurate, correct work that he's done at the end of his talk. He shouldn't be just coming out with, the world was a bit sick and needed acupuncture. Then that's when I go, no, please, Howard, he's done this amazing A+, amazing discussion, and then at the end, it just goes like that, and I go, no, Howard, I just put my hands on my head and go, please, no, just spoiled the whole talk, This is, I think, what Howard should be saying, and I can't see how you can disagree with it unless you've, some sort of personal grudge, or you got a chip on your shoulder, and, I cannot go out there and say, I am Howard Crowhurst, and I have got, these qualifications, or this or that. Well, Howard doesn't, He's not Professor Howard. He's not actually that bothered about the qualification. He's just, does the work and does the books and videos. But, this is the thing, why am I even recording this talk? Because, some people in the group might listen to it and, not even like me, not even get, halfway through the discussion, might not rate my credibility or stuff like that. These are all human things. And this is what these people, this is the subject of the Druids and of everything, It's about, what's it like when your the body and your energy is feeling low and down, What are people like when the energy's up, And this group, positive group, or this group, negative group, It's all about likes and dislikes, The human mind, the human spirit, How did they even get all these people to come together and move the stones to build the site if the person who was giving the talk, they all thought, I don't really like this guy, he's a bit of an idiot, They didn't even want to listen to his discussion, That's what it's about, and but I could just give up and say, well, I'm not going to give the talk then, But I don't feel like I have to. Why should I have to? It's all about that. Then you're getting onto other subjects, like you're getting onto popularity and bias and discrimination and things like that. I should be allowed to say what I want to say about the subject in my own style and character, how I want to say it and what I want to say about it without prejudice and without any discrimination against me, what I truly think about it, and, if people devalue it and say that's not worth anything and this guy don't know what he's talking about and just a load of gibberish, then at least I've had the right to say it, So, I cannot, that's what I wanted to say about these stones, and I don't think you cannot research these stones. You cannot have a megalithic research topic about these stones, I don't think, without saying that. Because to understand them, understand what's on them and what it's about, I think you have to include all subjects. Because like I've said, Riemann's hypothesis cannot be solved by maths alone. You can't solve the problems of the world alone just by being a professor in maths. You can't solve all the problems of the world alone by being a politician, even, because they need their other experts in each field, Maybe you could say you can't solve all the problems alone by having a lot of professors from a university, You might be able to say that, because at the end of the day, the professors in the university are only a small percentage of the population of everyone. And if we're having a democracy where we've all got equal right and equal vote and equal say, then surely all our opinions and votes are as equal to any professors, or else it's not a democracy anymore, is it? At the end of the day. And then you're getting on to the subject of, there are sexual discriminations in the world, racial discrimination in the world. Then you're getting on to academic discrimination, where people's opinion and thoughts are only credible or valid if you've got a paper that says you're a professor or you got a degree, Yeah, it seems to me that, I get annoyed when, they're favouring the feasting and favouring the fasting, when there are a lot of doctors now on the internet saying that fasting is exceptionally healthy and really good for you, and a lot more people should be doing it. And a lot of our ancestors, particularly spiritual leaders, used to do it. But yet, just because we've found evidence of a few farmers, driving a few pigs around, we don't know how many pigs each person ate, but yet unfortunately, we've got people now, academics, who are trying to be pushy with the feasting, and they're publishing it in the books. There's no doubt whatsoever that, feasts were held, It seems to me to be not political, but who's the person who's saying that, This is to find out who was at these sites back then. You got to dig up the bones and look at them, To find out who are the people who are pushing these theories on you, you got to have them stood in front of you, Who is Mike Parker Pearson, And to me, this is not being discriminative. This is observational. Mike looks like generally the person who might want to slip a couple more extra letters into feasting and make it fasting. Well, he might want to slip a few letters into the word fasting and make it into feasting, And as with the woman who did the who went to newgrange, she was slipping the word feasting in a few times into the Newgrange talk for the winter solstice, and that's just an observational thing that I notice. Who are the people who are slipping the feasting word into it? Oh, it's a couple of people who look like they've been doing a little bit too much feasting than fasting. This is what the Druids are all about: plants and herbs and health and diet, and medicine and things like that. You cannot separate the subjects. And on this stone, the dividing line down the bottom stone, the division, it's almost like dividing the subjects, but yet it's one stone, it's one piece of stone, it's not two separate stones. It's almost like, you can't divide the subjects, because it's the same thing. It's like, ecology is how everything interacts, in the whole ecological system. You can study wildlife, you can study biology, you can study, evolution, but the ecology, it cannot really, it isn't, and that's what measurement is. If you have a ruler, it's just one piece of wood, and then when you put all these little marks on it to separate it out, you're trying to divide it into separate things, separate names. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 1 centimetre, this is 2 centimetre, but it's just, this is trying to name the subjects, trying to separate the subjects into this is maths, this is science, this is physics, this is geography, this is geometry, they're only names, so... that's kind of like what I want to say about it. And that's the type of thing that I talk about when I get onto the subject of these stones and what I think other people should be talking about. And I never for one second want to, claim that, I know anything more than anyone else. But I only, that's what Howard, Howard needs to be, I don't, when Mike does all this amazing archaeology and things like that, and then he just, starts pulling the feast out of his pocket at the end of the conversation, and then Howard does all these amazing geographical measurements and confirmations and everything, and then he just pulls out the, the planet was sick and they had to implant these things to correct it. He's kind of like, he's clearly, it's not that people. There is an aspect, like I said, because you might say, well, acupuncture and the planet, isn't that to do with the North Pole and the South Pole and forces? Yes, but, the reason those stones were put and laid out was for permanent measurement and navigation, and to show off the knowledge and for study and travel and to... Also, they communicate things with. They communicate, this is the place for this, or that's the place for that, or this is the area, where you get flint from. Why would you need to travel? Why would you need to know, to go to these places to get things, to do stuff? That's the whole point. What Howard, really does make me happy with is when he does say that, it's not all about farming, and they didn't make all these just to celebrate farming at all. It's everything, it's, so you can know your way around and work out where you are and get places and not be misguided or misled, and setting up the way they wanted to map it out was this way, It's not it's not all dead straight lines and and angles. They're in the mind. The angles are in the thought construct. The angles exist. The exact angles and shapes exist in the mind. But the world, the Earth is not geometric. It's natural. It's the planet's round, but all the mountains and trees and rivers are in a natural form, and the way and the stars above us are, every star isn't the whole stars in the universe aren't, exactly existing in a perfect grid pattern like the Riemann hypothesis, are they? They're all kind of like, spread out in a more natural form, and I think that's why their natural form of mapping kind of was a bit more naturalistic, but it's not just to do with longitude and latitude. It's to do with the height of the mountains, and valleys and high places and low places, and people being high of spirit and low of spirit, and There's a lot more intelligence in the history of these people and the knowledge these people had than what we're being told. And I think some people don't want us to remember that, don't want us to know that. A lot of these things now are illegal, We can't use and study the sacraments in this country to investigate it properly because it's not even lawful, it's illegal. Yet, we're allowed to feast on cakes and buns, which are now proved, the modern bread. We've got doctors, Dr. Berg and other doctors on the internet, professional doctors on YouTube now saying, this bread that they've made for us is very, very toxic. It's not really healthy for the human body to eat it. It's very bad. Yet we've been given it, why isn't that illegal? Smoking's, smoking advertising smoking's now being made illegal, and smoking inside is illegal, haven't we, isn't there enough evidence that this food's not good for us by just looking around at the people? Look at the people around us, what's happening to us. We don't really need these expert doctors saying, bread doesn't digest very well and it's not good, it's turning us all diabetic and this and that, like Dr. Berg videos and things like that, we should be eating leaves and plants, Isn't that stating the obvious, in a way, when Caesar had his, crown of leaves around his head, but yet in the Lord's Prayer, we've got to give us this daily bread, there always seems to be, it's always known through history that the authorities always end up, being corruptible or corrupted, and that's why we've got sin in religion. We've got this, greed and all these different sins, yet, we've got all this feasting going on. Why have we got all this feasting at these religious ceremonies when the religious people don't have any problems eating all through the year? In fact, now there's that much food around that it's quite difficult to not eat, and the religious ceremonies were meant to celebrate the fasting period, A lot of different religious cultures have got the fasting period, but it ended up getting perverted into, like Christmas now, everyone's sat stuff in the face with turkey and making money for the government, and it's making people ill, That is... Howard's right in a way, there are imbalances, to do with, but they are, it's not the planet itself, that is the human being, the humans, the human culture and society has offset us out of nature, because of greed, but yet the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope Francis are not really doing anything about it yet. That is, it's on their naughty list in the books, in their book that they purport to be pushing on us, the Bible. It's on the naughty list, but yet they really are now only obsessed with charities and the poor and poverty. They're not really trying to help us and stop us from getting sick. It's kind of like the religion has kind of been corrupted in a way. Yet it's pretending and purporting that it's meant to be there to help us and save us and keep us healthy. Yet, it's like the government. The government is saying one thing and doing another. It's telling lies, and this is why we've got corruption and Nancy Pelosi and David Cameron making money out of his government, and they're making billions and making laws to suit themselves. I've gone on to politics, We say that we're not supposed to talk about politics. Yet, as I said before, it's impossible to separate the subjects, and the subjects, it's only a name. It's only a measurement, a name, a creation, naming something. Really, it's just the balance of everything, It's no different for me saying that about, than really essentially. And that some people don't understand that, and then they start complaining and saying, "No, you can't talk about this or that," because they don't really understand that when Howard Zinn goes on the subject in his talk about ancient geometry and ancient sites and ancient stones, he raises and goes on the subject of acupuncture and the planet being sick and aligned and the energies and forces of the planet. What are the energies and forces of the planet, and the creatures on the planet? Us human beings going around putting stones up, putting things here, putting things there, building buildings, building parliament, building governments, being sick. That is us in politics. It's just a word though. Politics is politics. If I want to call it Feng Shui of England, the Feng Shui of England and how the country's running and how humans are, and how our health's running, that is politics. It's just a different word for it, and this is the thing. This is now why we've got people saying, We need to stop having arguments. We need to try and understand each other more. Can't we go into these groups and not argue, But yet we've got Mark Zuckerberg, inventing Facebook, and then he's saying, oh, if you don't like someone, just block them. If you don't like someone, ban them. He's not saying, if you don't understand someone, press the flag. I don't really understand this, and I've got, I'm deliberating whether it should be in this group or not, But Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want you to understand. Mark Zuckerberg wants to live in Hawaii in his fancy house and everyone to buy reimanns. And he wants, when you don't like something, he doesn't want you to understand. He wants you to be able to block it. These are the Scientologists taking over the world. The Scientologists taking over. And this is the opposite of what you've got with the Christianity. At least what Christianity purported to be pushing was forgiveness. Forgiveness, because if you don't forgive, then you'll end up blocking all your friends out and you'll be solitary and alone. Forgiveness is the opposite to blocking, and confessing is telling the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, even if people don't like it, I guess, or even if you've done something wrong, but also even if people don't like it. In a court, you've got to put your hand on the Bible and swear to God you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? But if it's an offence to be racist, if it's a criminal offence to say something sexually discriminative, right? If that's illegal, how can you go into a court and say it? How can you go into a court and give evidence? How can you open your mouth and tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth if sexual discrimination was illegal? It's because you're putting your hand on the Bible and, by the power of God invested in me, I would swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I'm not going to get prosecuted for a second offence when I'm saying what I really think and feel in connection to the charges, because, when you're giving evidence, you have to tell the truth, the truth, and nothing but the truth, supposedly, and that's this forgiveness thing in the Bible. You might say, what the hell's got that to do with being in the chamber at Newgrange? Well, I'm in a chamber. They call it the chambers, the law chambers. The House of Commons is a chamber. The House of Lords is a chamber, In court, you're in the chambers, And in Newgrange, you got the spiritual leaders, you're in the chambers, It is, Well, that's tenuous. Well, it's not tenuous. It's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'm raising spirituality again. This is what it's all about. And then you could say, well, you're just raving at this point. Well, that, a lot of people, say that, when you go to raves and you get into a spiritual way of thinking and level where you have revelations, in the Bible they're called revelations. These are revelations, and some people either understand you and some people don't understand you. And then there's a bit of a taboo where certain circles of people already understand this and know this themselves, so there's no need to go into it, and it's kind of a waste of time to go into it, and then it's kind of pointless to go into it, and it's just raving if you go into it. It's impolite, is how Crower says. It's impolite to talk about certain things, and this is why you get Jordan Peterson. I think a lot of things Jordan Peterson does and says when he goes up and does his lectures and presentations that he gets, worldwide recognition for. I kind of sit there and you go, it's kind of, I get annoyed with Jordan Peterson because I think Jordan Peterson states the obvious all day. A lot of people don't want to even open their mouth and speak because it's stating the obvious, but then some people just, feel it needs to be said, and that's the type of person Jordan Peterson is. He's got to go up there, and the people that don't understand, I've got to try to get it through to them. And there are people that don't understand. And I don't like to have to talk about it and go into it because it kind of, some people, already know stuff, and some people don't, and then some people are going to disagree with you vehemently. No matter what you say to some people, they're either A, they're not going to understand it and they're just going to argue with you. B, they may just not like you as a person, and even if you did say something they understood, they're still not going to like you just because they don't like you anyway. There are all these different factors in play, and it can be kind of difficult, And I think that what I think, at the end of the day, you can't disagree that what these people who made Newgrange and Noaf did was an amazing feat and spectacular. They actually built it, and it actually does line up properly, you know, and they actually did, you know, cover all of the British Isles and, you know, northwestern Europe, and they did successfully, you know, do major achievements. You know, you can't deny that because it exists, it's there, you know. So I kind of think that it's brilliant and amazing to exist in the first place. But, you know, I want to go back to that reimanns thing again. So to sum it up, if I had to edit this conversation down to 30 seconds, I would say that I don't think without a shadow of a doubt that the reimanns principle has things to do with the fundamental underlying thinking and reasoning of what is on these stones. It's got a relationship to that, as does the symbol and the mythology of the dragon and where that came from, what it arose out of and means and refers to, going into that subject. You know, you've got to get into a subject, you've got to go into it, you know, you've got to get right into it and get into contemplating it, thinking about it, deliberating about it, which is what I've just been doing for the last 1 hour and 30 minutes, you know. And some people aren't into it, you know. You could go into a maths classroom and it's hard to get people interested in maths, you know. So, you know, I kind of said what I wanted to say about these stones now. Maybe I could have gone into more detail. Maybe I could have, you know, had a little bit more sort of, you know, more different character or, you know, presentation style. But that's just me. I can't help that, you know. I can't help being myself. So, you know, that's kind of what I wanted to say about it. So I don't know whether people are going to listen to it or not. You don't have to.